For 33 years, the desert had slept. No explosions, no shock waves, no nuclear fire beneath the Nevada sky. Until now, on October 29, 2025, just days before a high-stakes summit with China's leader, President Donald Trump issued an order that stunned the world. He directed the Pentagon to immediately resume nuclear weapons testing. A sentence short enough to fit in a headline, but heavy enough to shift the balance of global power. Newsrooms scrambled. Allies called for clarification. And inside the Pentagon, even Trump's own officials were uncertain. What did he mean by testing? Was this a return to full nuclear detonations, or simply an escalation of non-explosive experiments, the kind that test materials and delivery systems without triggering a chain reaction? The White House refused to clarify. And that silence, that ambiguity, was deliberate. Because in geopolitics, silence can be louder than any explosion. If the U.S. were to test again, there's only one place it could happen: the Nevada National Security Site, north of Las Vegas. Between 1951 and 1992, over 1,000 nuclear tests scarred its soil. Now, after decades of quiet, the ghost of the Cold War stirs again. Local leaders immediately vowed resistance, warning of radiation, public outrage, and broken promises. But inside Washington, the mood was different. To the administration, this wasn't nostalgia, it was necessity. Subcritical experiments had maintained America's arsenal for decades, but they lacked the spectacle, the message. Trump's circle saw testing as more than science. It was a signal, aimed squarely at Moscow and Beijing. To understand this moment, we have to look back, because this story didn't begin in the desert. It began in the snow. In November of 2023, as the world's attention fixed on the chaos in Ukraine, Moscow made a quiet but devastating announcement. Russia was withdrawing its ratification of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the global pact that for nearly 3 decades had forbidden explosive nuclear testing. It was more than a bureaucratic maneuver. It was a crack in the foundation of nuclear restraint, a signal that the rules written after the Cold War no longer applied. Within months, satellites orbiting above the Arctic began picking up something strange. Heat signatures, movement, and renewed construction at Russia's remote test site, buried deep beneath the frozen tundra. It was a place that had once echoed with unimaginable power, a site where the Soviet Union unleashed Tsar Bomb, the most powerful explosion ever created by man. And now, after decades of stillness, it was stirring again. Intelligence analysts watched the images stream in, fresh roads cut through permafrost, cranes hauling unknown cargo, and equipment consistent with subsurface test preparations. At the same time, Moscow's state media began to parade its new generation of doomsday weapons. Footage of the Poseidon underwater drone, a nuclear torpedo said to create radioactive surge waves. Clips of the Burevestnik, a nuclear-powered cruise missile designed to fly for days, circling the globe before striking. These weren't just weapons, they were messages. To Washington, the message was clear. Russia was no longer pretending. The age of arms control was over. Every treaty, every safeguard, every illusion of stability built since the fall of the Soviet Union was unraveling. And as Russia tore up the rulebook, its war in Ukraine dragged into its 4th brutal year, a war of attrition that had already consumed hundreds of thousands of lives, a war that had redrawn borders, shattered alliances, and turned Eastern Europe into a live-fire laboratory for 21st-century warfare. Each passing month, the warnings grew louder, the rhetoric more reckless, the threats more explicit. Russian state TV began to speak casually of limited nuclear use. Officials hinted that tactical weapons could be deployed to preserve the motherland. And for Washington, those signals were deafening. Because every time the Kremlin raised the nuclear shadow, the US and its allies were forced to ask the question no one wanted to face. What happens when deterrence fails? That question, that fear, became the quiet drumbeat behind Trump's fateful decision. When Russia broke its promise, America decided it would not be the only one left following the rules. But this was never just about Russia. It was also about China. For years, Beijing has been building its power, quietly, methodically, relentlessly. Not with fanfare or fiery speeches, but with concrete steel and silence. Far from the world's cameras, deep in the deserts of Xinjiang, satellite images revealed a startling sight. Hundreds of new nuclear silos, a ghostly grid stretching for miles across the sand. Each one, a promise of power. Each one, a warning. Since 1996, China hasn't conducted a nuclear test, but its scientists have studied, simulated, and stockpiled. It has built new hypersonic missiles, mobile launchers, command bunkers, and next-generation submarines, each designed to ensure that in any future war, Beijing would not be the one caught unprepared. Inside the Pentagon, analysts called it the silent surge, a nuclear buildup without declarations, a race without a starting gun. And when Trump's advisors briefed him, they warned that the United States was facing not one, but two rising nuclear powers, both testing America's resolve, both expanding while Washington hesitated. Trump's team saw the testing order as a deterrent message, a shockwave of resolve meant to echo from Moscow to Beijing, proof that America would not be outpaced, that the silence of Nevada would no longer be mistaken for weakness. But beyond America's borders, the world saw something else. They saw a fragile global order beginning to crack, an old system of restraint, built on treaties, trust, and fear, buckling under the weight of ambition. Because if the United States, the nation that once defined the rules, decides those rules no longer matter, what's to stop anyone else from following? In London, Paris, and Tokyo, diplomats whispered the same fear, that the nuclear era, once contained, was beginning again. India and Pakistan would take note. North Korea would celebrate. Iran would accelerate. And the delicate balance that kept humanity from destroying itself would tilt, just slightly, toward chaos. This was no longer about missiles or silos or strategy. It was about trust and how quickly it can vanish when the architects of peace decide that power speaks louder than principle. Because when the nation that wrote the rules starts breaking them first, the rest of the world begins to wonder whether the age of restraint is already over. If America truly resumes explosive nuclear tests, the consequences will be instant and irreversible. The global test moratorium, the unspoken pact that has kept the world from nuclear brinkmanship for more than 3 decades, would collapse overnight. Treaties would crumble like glass. The Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, once the cornerstone of international restraint, would become nothing more than a relic, a signature on forgotten paper. And then the dominoes would begin to fall. Russia would not wait long. Its silos in the Arctic North could roar back to life, sending mushroom clouds into the frozen sky above Novaya Zemlya. China, unwilling to appear vulnerable, would follow suit, perhaps with a symbolic underground detonation in the Gobi Desert. Each blast would send not just shockwaves through the earth, but through every government, every newsroom, every capital on the planet. A chain reaction of fear. Non-nuclear states would panic. The United Nations would descend into emergency sessions. Diplomats would point fingers. Markets would convulse. In Tokyo and Seoul, governments would demand immediate reassurance from Washington. And in private, some would whisper the unthinkable. Perhaps it was time to build their own deterrent. In the Middle East, nations long balancing on the edge of ambition, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, would interpret the moment as permission. If the world's superpowers can test again, why shouldn't they? And in the chaos, North Korea would feel vindicated, proclaiming itself not a pariah, but a prophet. Arms control experts warn that the so-called benefits of a nuclear test, a small data gain here, a marginal technical verification there, are dwarfed by the diplomatic and moral fallout, because this isn't just about science or security. It's about perception, and perception is power. Once the silence is broken, it can never truly return. The sound of a single detonation, even deep underground, would echo across decades of human effort to contain the atom. Every treaty signed, every protest marched, every promise made to never let history repeat itself. All of it undone in an instant, and the world would awaken to a chilling truth that the nuclear age was never over. It was only asleep, and now it's wide awake again. Today, U.S.-Russia relations hang by a thread, a fraying cord stretched between pride and paranoia. The war in Ukraine grinds on with no end in sight. Each month brings new weapons, new warnings, new lines crossed. Sanctions continue to squeeze Moscow's economy, while Russian cyber attacks, propaganda, and battlefield threats push Washington further into confrontation. Diplomatic cables have turned into accusations. Accusations have turned into ultimatums. And ultimatums throughout history have never ended well. The two nations still talk, but rarely listen. Their ambassadors meet in sterile rooms, their words rehearsed, their smiles tight. What was once deterrence has become distrust. Every satellite movement, every radar blip, every military exercise is now seen not as routine, but as a potential provocation. In this echo chamber of suspicion, a single misunderstood message could ignite catastrophe. A weapons test misread as a strike, a drill mistaken for an attack, a computer glitch turning false data into fatal action, a spark that neither side intends, but neither side can afford to ignore. And the terrifying truth is that we've been here before. The world has already come within seconds of annihilation, from the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 to the false alarms of 1983, when a Soviet officer named Stanislav Petrov chose not to report what he believed were incoming American missiles. One man's hesitation saved the world. But what happens when the next signal is misread not by a human being, but by an algorithm? Artificial intelligence now monitors both nations' early warning systems, machines interpreting data faster than any diplomat can react. And if that machine decides that a test is an attack, the countdown begins before a human hand can stop it. History has shown us what happens when nations misread signals. But this time, the line between message and mistake has never been thinner, and never more automated. Because in an age where seconds decide survival, the next world war may not begin with a declaration, but with a misunderstanding. Yes, President Trump did order the Pentagon to restart nuclear testing. But his wording left just enough ambiguity to keep the world guessing. Maybe that was the point. Russia's withdrawal from the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, its growing aggression in Ukraine, and China's rising nuclear power all became the backdrop for this gamble. If the US detonates a nuclear device again, it would mark the end of a 33-year era of restraint. It would invite retaliation and remind the world that deterrence and destruction still share the same language. The silence is over. Now the question is, what will the echo bring? If you found this analysis thought-provoking, take a moment to subscribe and like this video. It helps more people discover stories the mainstream rarely dares to explore, and it allows this channel to keep digging into the truths that shape our world. Your voice matters here. So tell us in the comments, do you see Trump's nuclear gamble as a masterstroke of deterrence, a bold move meant to keep America dominant, or the beginning of something far more dangerous, a new arms race, born from pride, fear, and miscalculation? How will history remember this moment? As the decision that restored strength, or the spark that reignited the Cold War? Share your thoughts below. Because silence is no longer an option. The conversation begins with you, and the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, only survives when we speak it aloud.